You ever walk into a room and feel every eye stop on you? Yeah, that was me. They thought I was just the quiet one. The girl who worked late, kept her head down, played nice. But that night in Nashville, I didn't just walk out of that office. I walked out with every lie they ever told. See, betrayal doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it walks in wearing a smile and holding your coffee. They tried to erase me. Instead, I turned their silence into my story. Stick around. You're about to see exactly how it happened. My name is Lacey. I'm 31 years old, and this is how I turned their betrayal into my blueprint for power. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The air in the office felt warmer than usual that night. Not because of the heating, our building downtown always ran a little cold in December, but because of the lights, the noise, the pulse of people who were trying too hard to forget the quarter that nearly broke us. String lights blinked along the ceiling, flickering over tinsel that someone had wrapped around the whiteboards. The smell of barbecue clung to the carpet, sweet smoke, grease, and a trace of peppermint from the punch bowl that someone had spiked when management wasn't looking. I stayed near the back, pretending to scroll through my phone. Coworkers in ugly sweaters shouted into the karaoke mic, their laughter bouncing off the glass walls. Someone in reindeer antlers attempted the worm and crashed halfway through, the room exploding in laughter. I smiled because that's what you do when you want to look like you belong. My reflection in the window didn't smile back. Nate was across the room. Even in the chaos, I could always find him. Tall, easy grin, the sort of man who looked like he had everything under control. He was talking to Carla, the project lead from 2 rows over. They leaned close, laughing about something I couldn't hear. A few months ago, I would have brushed it off. But lately, their laughter had the wrong rhythm. Too private, too careful. When Brad, our manager, called me up for my song, I took the mic without hesitation. The room applauded like they were relieved someone competent would finally sing. My hands didn't shake. I'd rehearsed this moment differently in my head for weeks, but standing there beneath those flickering lights, I realized I didn't need an audience. I just needed clarity. The first song that cued wasn't mine. The machine froze, the screen flickered, and a burst of static filled the room. A few people groaned. I exhaled slowly, then set the mic down. I could have fixed it. I knew the system better than anyone, but instead, I turned off the display and walked toward the window. The city glowed beyond the glass. Nashville at night, alive, careless. In that reflection, I watched Nate step closer to Carla. He touched her arm. Her head tilted back as she laughed, her drink flashing red in the lights. For 1 second, the whole scene folded in on itself. Music, chatter, the taste of burnt sugar from the punch. And I knew. The truth wasn't in any message or rumor. It was in the ease between them, the tiny betrayals invisible to everyone else. The moment didn't break me. It organized me. I left the mic where it was, slipped my coat off the back of a chair, and walked toward the hallway. My boots sank into the carpet, each step steady, deliberate. I heard someone call my name, Nate maybe, or Brad, but I didn't look back. The laughter behind me blurred into white noise. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. Streetlight halos shimmered against the mist rising from the pavement. I stopped near the entrance, feeling the weight of my phone in my pocket. My thumb hovered over the folder of evidence I'd been building for weeks. The emails, the duplicated files, the time-stamped access logs that told a story no one could ignore. I'd found them quietly, line by line, after noticing subtle changes in the project database, little edits that didn't match my style, slide revisions I never made. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw his initials in the metadata, and hers. I remember sitting alone in the office that night, the hum of the vending machine filling the silence, when the final piece clicked into place. Betrayal isn't loud, it's precise. It happens in small permissions. One file copied, one meeting left off the calendar, one forgot to tell you that turns into a missing paycheck. I didn't cry. I documented. I saved everything. So when I walked into that party tonight, I already knew what I would do. Not to humiliate them, not to cause a scene. I would leave the proof quietly on the right desk at the right time. Let the facts do the talking. The elevator doors slid open, and the mirror inside caught my face in its dim light. I looked calm, maybe too calm. My reflection reminded me of my mother's warning years ago. The world doesn't reward anger, baby. It rewards composure. I used to hate that advice. Tonight, it felt like armor. When the doors opened on the lobby, the security guard looked up from his newspaper. "Heading out early, Lacey?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a small smile. "Early start tomorrow." He nodded. "Merry Christmas." I stepped into the night, my breath curling into the cold. Across the street, a row of neon signs painted the wet asphalt pink and blue. I could still hear faint music from the windows above, muffled by the glass. A car horn echoed somewhere down Broadway. The city felt indifferent, and I liked that. Indifference gave me space to think. I walked 3 blocks to the parking garage, the city wrapping around me like a film set, steam rising from manhole covers, a couple arguing near a food truck, a saxophone wailing from a bar doorway. Every sound felt sharpened, every color brighter, as if the act of knowing the truth had tuned the world to a higher frequency. When I reached my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I opened my laptop, connected to the company's secure network, and uploaded my report to HR and legal, a complete record of what had happened, with evidence, timestamps, and access histories. No commentary, just facts. It would hit their inboxes before sunrise. I sat back and listened to the low hum of the car heater. My fingers were still cold. I thought of Nate's laugh, the one that used to make me feel safe, and how strange it was that the same sound now meant something else entirely. Trust is a fragile currency. Once it breaks, it never spins the same. Headlights swept across the concrete walls as another car passed. I imagined the morning meeting, the startled looks, the scramble to explain. I wouldn't be there for it. I'd already scheduled a meeting with the board for the following week. There were other projects, other companies that had been watching my work. Betrayal, I realized, can also be a reference, proof that your value was worth stealing. By the time I reached the highway, the city had thinned to ribbons of light in my rearview mirror. I rolled down the window and let the wind erase the last trace of party music from my hair. The night smelled of cold metal and rain. Somewhere behind me, the story I'd been living was ending, and another was waiting, built from clean pages and unbroken trust. I drove until the skyline disappeared. The road stretched ahead like a quiet promise. My phone buzzed once, an email notification. I didn't read it yet. I knew what it would say. I laughed softly, not out of spite, but relief. Sometimes walking away isn't defeat. It's the only kind of victory that lasts. The cold air outside hit me like a wall, but it felt cleaner than the room I had just walked out of. Nashville winters aren't brutal, not compared with Michigan where I grew up, but that night the breeze felt sharp enough to peel something old from my skin. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the office lights shimmer against the glass, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. People always imagine revenge as loud, but truth doesn't sound like an explosion. It sounds like a door closing softly behind you. The noise you leave behind becomes someone else's echo. Mine started the Monday before the party, and it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like waking up. That morning smelled of burnt coffee and cinnamon wax. Someone had set a candle near the printer, against policy but tolerated in December. The scent clung to my hair as I scrolled through the shared drive. I was hunting for a folder Nate swore he needed for his presentation. He'd been restless all week, always fixing something, always too busy to meet my eyes. When I couldn't find the folder, irritation prickled at the edge of my focus. Then I saw a new directory nested inside the admin files, half hidden by a long string of test numbers. At first, I thought it was a backup. Then I opened it. 2 files, both audio logs, both saved at hours when no one should have been working. Curiosity overruled hesitation. I plugged in my headphones. Static, then voices, too familiar to mistake. My stomach went cold. They weren't talking about work. They were talking about me, about opportunities, about taking credit, about rearranging what I'd built until it no longer had my fingerprints on it. I listened once, then twice. The words didn't change, but something inside me did. The world slowed until the office sounds, the tapping keyboards, the whirring copier, sounded distant, like waves from another life. I should have cried. I should have felt the floor tilt. Instead, I sat still, pulse steady, eyes unfocused. Shock, I think, is a kind of mercy. It gives you time to plan. The second recording hurt more, not because of insults or tone, but because it revealed intent. My data, my research, used without credit. My analysis presented as their collaboration. Every late night I'd spent polishing those numbers suddenly felt naive. Betrayal wasn't emotional now. It was procedural, logged in timestamps. That was the moment clarity arrived. I saved the files to a secure folder and closed everything. My fingers trembled only once when I realized I was breathing too shallowly. I minimized the window, straightened my posture, and returned to my spreadsheets as if nothing had happened. The world didn't notice the shift, but I did. The future, once fogged by doubt, had snapped into focus. All week, I watched quietly. Small things stood out: the way Carla hovered near Nate's desk, the hush of their laughter in the hallway, how their conversation always ended the second I entered. None of it was proof on its own, but together it formed a pattern. I didn't confront them. I documented, confirmed, observed. I became a ghost with purpose. By Wednesday, I'd compiled enough to understand the scope. Thursday brought verification. My login accessed at midnight from Nate's device. Facts, not feelings. Evidence, not gossip. When Friday arrived, I knew the party would be the last time I'd walk into that office without protection. That evening, the elevator hummed its familiar tune. I watched the floor numbers climb and rehearsed nothing. There was nothing left to rehearse. Inside the conference room, the party shimmered under cheap string lights, all laughter and exhaustion. I performed my part, smiled where expected, accepted a paper plate of brisket, nodded through small talk. The warmth in the room felt artificial, recycled. When the karaoke machine faltered later, no one knew why. I did. I'd checked its connection earlier, ensuring nothing would embarrass anyone again. No hidden surprises, no malfunctions that could twist truth into spectacle. The real work was already done elsewhere, silently uploaded and time-stamped in the company's system. My report waited in a private draft, sealed and ready. The party was only closure. Afterward, when I stepped outside, the quiet of the city pressed against me. I half expected footsteps behind me, but the only sound was traffic 3 blocks away. I leaned against the railing and stared at the skyline reflected in the glass tower opposite. Behind those windows, hundreds of other people were living their own small betrayals, their own recoveries. It was strange comfort. The door opened minutes later. Janice from HR emerged, coat half-buttoned, hair loose from its bun. She joined me without a word, breath fogging the air. "Lacey," she said softly, "are you all right?" I nodded. Eventually. Her eyes studied mine, searching for anger. She didn't find any. "We'll need to talk Monday," she said. Officially. But off the record, "Thank you for handling this quietly." I almost laughed at that. Quietly. The word sounded both heavy and kind. She placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle. "They won't get away with this. Not if the documentation is what you say it is." "It is," I replied. She gave a small, approving nod, then returned inside. I stayed. The hum of the city replaced the echo of party music. Through the glass, I could see Nate gesturing wildly, Carla's face pale under the fluorescent light. It didn't move me anymore. When I finally walked to my car, the night air stung my cheeks. My phone buzzed once, an email confirmation that my submission had been received by compliance. I sat behind the wheel, forehead resting on the steering column, letting the heater thaw my hands. The dashboard clock glowed faint green. 11:42 p.m. I had time before midnight to decide what came next. I thought of Michigan winters, of how my father used to say that cold weather revealed what things were made of: metal contracts, wood splinters, ice cracks. People are no different. Under pressure, we show our seams. I'd spent years smoothing mine over, trying to be agreeable, dependable. Tonight, I felt the steel beneath that surface for the first time. I started the engine. The tires hissed against damp asphalt as I eased onto the street. Traffic lights changed ahead, their colors painting the windshield red, then green. My reflection stared back, calm, almost unfamiliar. The music on the radio was low and slow, some country song about leaving town. I turned it down further until only the rhythm remained. By the time I reached the bridge over the river, the city behind me looked smaller, almost delicate. I pulled over for a moment, stepping out into the wind. Water below reflected the scattered light of passing cars. It smelled of cold iron and distance. I let the phone rest in my pocket, unread. Whatever messages waited could wait longer. The story was moving without me now. I thought about what Janice said. Thank you for handling this quietly. She hadn't realized how much that mattered. Noise draws attention, but attention fades. Documentation endures. The truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to exist where it can't be erased. I exhaled and whispered to the dark water. Let them write their statements. I've already written mine. Then I got back into the car. The heater hummed, and with each mile I felt the weight of that office, that relationship, that old version of myself drift further behind. Not erased, just archived. Proof that I had learned what not to repeat. Somewhere past the city limits, I laughed quietly. Not the bitter kind. The honest kind that escapes when you realize you survived something designed to break you. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. And it was only the beginning. Monday came fast. The kind of Monday where the parking lot feels too still, where even the air hesitates before moving. I parked in my usual space on the 3rd level, beneath the security camera I'd chosen months ago out of habit. For the first time in a long while, I didn't sit there gripping the steering wheel, inventing reasons to stay put. I just watched my breath cloud the windshield, felt it fade, and stepped out. The elevator doors opened with their familiar groan. Inside, the mirrored walls showed a woman who looked calm, almost detached. Same blazer, same steady eyes. The only thing different was the weight that was gone. When I reached our floor, the hum of fluorescent lights sounded louder than usual, a chorus of electricity that filled the silence no one wanted to break. People moved slower that morning. Conversations stayed low. The air held that strange quiet that comes after a storm, the kind that pretends to be normal but isn't. My desk looked untouched, a little island in a sea of careful glances. Tara glanced up from her screen and nodded once. Not pity. Something closer to acknowledgement. Angela from accounting walked past and set a paper cup beside my keyboard without saying a word. Black coffee. She knew. By 9:14, Janice appeared beside me, clipboard pressed against her chest, the scent of her lilac lotion cutting through the office air. Lacey, can I borrow you for a few minutes? Of course. The walk to HR felt longer than it should have. Glass walls, neutral carpet, the soft click of our shoes. The hallway always reminded me of courthouses from old movies, too clean, too quiet. Inside the office, Brad sat at the end of the table, shoulders hunched, a line of exhaustion around his mouth. He wasn't angry. He was older somehow, like the weekend had aged him. Janice closed the door behind us. Have a seat. I did. The chair was cold through my jacket. She folded her hands. We reviewed the materials you submitted, the files, the timestamps, the network logs. Brad added, IT verified the access trail. It confirms your report. I nodded, hands folded in my lap. I didn't need to defend anything now. The facts were doing that for me. Brad sighed, the kind of sigh people make when they realize the truth isn't optional anymore. I'm not going to ask why you chose to bring this forward. I think we all understand. Janice's tone softened. We just need to confirm one thing for documentation. Did you alter anything you submitted? No, I said. Everything's original. You can check the metadata. She made a note without looking up. Brad leaned back. The hum of the overhead light filled the pause. We've placed both employees on administrative leave pending review. he said. We'll be conducting an internal audit of the project as well. Janice added, we believe significant portions of your work were used without authorization. They were, I said quietly. The data set, the summary slides, even the client prep notes. Janice hesitated before asking, would you like to pursue formal charges? For a moment, the air thinned. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. No, I said finally. Not now. I just want everything documented. If anyone tries to rewrite what happened, the record will be there. Janice nodded once. Brad looked at her, then at me. You handled this with more grace than most people would have. I didn't want to burn the building down, I said. Just wanted the lights turned on. When I left the office, the hallway seemed brighter, not triumphant, just steady. I sat at my desk and opened my inbox. Routine emails, system notifications, calendar invites. The world kept moving as if nothing had happened. But every so often, I caught someone's glance lingering a second too long, and in their eyes, I saw the quiet acknowledgement of what truth looks like when it finally steps into daylight. Around 2, Brian from IT stopped beside my desk. He was holding a small USB drive, his badge swinging from its lanyard. Hey, he said, lowering his voice. Thought you might want this. Copy of the logs, clean and time-stamped. HR has the master, but keep it for yourself. Thanks, I said. He shifted his weight. For what it's worth. You handled that better than anyone I've seen. Then he walked off, leaving the faint smell of printer toner and coffee in his wake. I sat there, the drive warm in my palm, realizing how strange respect can feel when you've stopped asking for it. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. The porch light was already on, casting a soft gold glow over the driveway. Inside, the air smelled like tomato sauce and baked bread. Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel and smiled without asking questions. You look tired, she said. Sit down. Dad came in from the garage still wearing his flannel jacket, a toothpick between his teeth. He glanced at me, then at the plate Mom set down. You need anything? No. He nodded, sat across from me. You want me to call someone? I smiled faintly. Definitely not. That was our way, short sentences that carried more than they said. We ate mostly in silence, the clink of forks filling the room. When Mom refilled my glass, she brushed my hand, and I knew she already understood more than I'd ever explain. The next morning, the office felt different. Carla's desk was empty. Nate's, too. Their chairs were still slightly turned as if they'd left mid-sentence. No announcement, no goodbye email, just absence. People pretended to ignore it, but absence has its own gravity. You can feel it pull every conversation into orbit around it. At lunch, Tara joined me in the break room, carrying 2 plastic containers. She slid one toward me. Leftovers, she said. You need the calories. I laughed. What makes you think that? You've been running on caffeine for a week. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. I saw your name on the revised project deck. You're presenting solo? Looks like it. She nodded slowly. You earned it. I didn't do any of this for a promotion. I know, she said. That's why you deserve it. That afternoon, I stayed late, refining slides that already felt memorized. Outside the windows, the sky bruised into purple. Streetlights blinked on one by one, their reflections stretching across the glass conference room wall. The office had grown quiet again, but this silence wasn't tense. It was clean, cleared of pretense. When I finally shut down my computer, I caught my reflection in the dark monitor. Tired eyes, faint smile, steady shoulders. I realized I wasn't waiting for closure anymore. It had already happened, quietly, in a small office with a clipboard and a sigh. Driving home, Nashville's lights shimmered against the river. I rolled the window down, the cold air biting at my fingertips. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played a song about starting over. I didn't sing along, I just listened. The lyrics sounded like possibility. By the time I reached my apartment, the night had softened. I stood by the window looking down at the city, coffee mug warm in my hands. Tomorrow there would be another meeting, another set of deadlines, another ordinary day. But ordinary no longer felt small. Ordinary meant peace. I thought of everything that had brought me here, the files, the evidence, the questions, the long walk to HR, and realized none of it was really about them. It was about learning how to hold your own truth without breaking it in your fists. The meeting with the client was set for Friday. Same room, same table. Only this time, the voice leading the presentation would be mine. No microphone, no noise, just the sound of someone finally being heard. The night before the presentation, sleep refused to come. Not because of nerves, not anymore. Because memory had its own pulse, steady and intrusive, echoing every choice that had brought me here. I lay on my side, staring at the ceiling, tracing the thin glow of the streetlight bleeding through the blinds. The air in my apartment smelled faintly of coffee grounds and the faint citrus from the candle I'd forgotten to blow out. It was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of tires hissing on wet asphalt outside. I closed my eyes, but every time I did, another fragment of the past drifted up like dust. Late nights at the office, me still typing while they left early, claiming strategy sessions that never produced strategy, their laughter fading down the hallway while I recalculated margins alone. Carla's syrupy compliments that sounded like applause but felt like measuring tape. "You always look so polished," she'd say, then pause and almost smile, like she was calculating how sharp my edges were. And Nate, with that hand on my lower back, casual enough to look harmless, firm enough to remind me he thought he was leading. I remembered the night he told me I was too intense, like ambition was a flaw that needed softening. I remembered his voice breaking when his father went into the hospital, and how I stayed on the phone for 4 hours while he cried and said nothing. How the next morning, when I stopped by his apartment to bring him breakfast, Carla's scarf was draped over the back of his chair, navy with gold threads, elegant, out of place. The image had replayed itself in my mind for months, but what haunted me most wasn't the betrayal. It was the slow erosion that came before it. The way they made me feel small, quietly, deliberately. The way I started apologizing for taking up space I'd earned. But that version of me was gone now. Friday would prove it. I got up before dawn, restless energy carrying me through the motions of morning. Shower, coffee, hair pinned back. I stood before my closet for longer than I should have, staring at the navy blazer I'd almost given away because Carla once said it looked too sharp for a team setting. Her words echoed, and I smiled without warmth. Sharp was exactly what the day required. The city outside was still half asleep when I drove downtown. The sun hadn't cleared the skyline yet, but the windows of the office tower were already glinting gold. I parked in my usual spot, turned off the ignition, and watched my reflection in the dark screen of the dashboard. Calm, collected, unapologetic. The conference room was quiet when I arrived. The smell of brewed coffee drifted from the corner, mixing with the faint scent of disinfectant. My laptop was already connected. The screensaver danced across the wall in muted colors. I stood at the head of the table, palms resting against the cool metal edge, and let the silence settle like armor. Brad entered first, followed by Janice, both carrying notebooks and expressions that were more neutral than they meant to be. Then came the clients, pressed suits, travel mugs, polite smiles. No one mentioned the 2 empty chairs that should have been filled. Their absence spoke its own language. When it was time, I began. My voice came steady, not loud, not timid, measured. The first slide illuminated the wall, and I watched as the light reflected off the glass, off their eyes, off mine. Data, charts, projections, every number, every analysis, every conclusion had been built by my hands. I spoke not to prove, but to demonstrate. The words flowed easily now, each sentence carrying months of effort, each pause deliberate. Halfway through, I saw understanding ripple across the room. One of the senior clients leaned forward, another tapped a pen against his notebook, nodding in rhythm with my explanation. They were hearing me, not as a replacement for someone else, not as a supporting act, but as the architect of the work itself. When I finished, silence held for a beat. Then applause, firm, unforced, a sound that reached through me, grounding me. Brad caught my eye, his expression softening into something that looked like respect. Not pity, not obligation. Recognition. As people packed up their laptops, Brad stayed behind. He waited until the last client's footsteps faded down the hall. "Lacey," he said quietly, "that was excellent." "Thank you." "I owe you an apology. I should have seen it sooner." I met his gaze. A lot of people should have. He didn't argue. He nodded once, the kind of nod that carried both agreement and regret. "There's going to be an opening. Senior strategist. Full ownership of the next campaign. We'd like to offer it to you first." I didn't smile, didn't cry, just inhaled, steady and deliberate. Send the offer in writing. That night, I went home and opened my phone. I scrolled through old messages, threads of laughter that no longer felt like mine, photos from weekends that now looked staged. Then I selected his name and deleted it. Not archived, deleted. The cloud backup, the text history, the shared reminders, the contact sync, every trace erased. The quiet afterward felt like closing a door that had been stuck open too long. The mug was next. White ceramic, chipped at the rim, stamped with a fading quote, "World's okayest boyfriend." I'd almost thrown it away months earlier, but something about keeping it had felt easier. Tonight, it didn't. I wrapped it in paper, dropped it into a box, and drove to the consignment store down the street. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and detergent. The cashier, a woman in her 20s with bright green nails, lifted the mug and tilted her head. "Breakup box?" I smiled. "Breakthrough box." Her grin widened. "That's better." She scanned it and dropped it into the donation bin with a satisfying clink. Outside, the night air felt lighter. Streetlights shimmered across the pavement like scattered coins. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, breathing in the freedom that comes from releasing something that once felt permanent. By Monday, the office had settled back into rhythm. Emails pinged, phones rang, coffee brewed. The hum of normalcy had returned, but I hadn't. I was quieter, sharper, more deliberate in how I moved through each hour. People smiled differently at me now, a little longer, a little more sincerely. Respect, once withheld, had found its place. After lunch, I walked past the empty desks where Nate and Carla used to sit. Their chairs had been reassigned, the nameplates gone. The space looked oddly peaceful. No whispers, no hidden glances, just air. Clean, quiet air. Later that afternoon, I stood by the window overlooking the city. Sunlight glinted off parked cars, and in their reflections I caught my own, blurred, shifting, steady. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to rehearse who I was supposed to be. I just was. People often talk about revenge like it's fire, but they're wrong. Fire burns fast and leaves smoke. This, what I felt, was something else. A quiet rebuilding. The slow reconstruction of dignity. Revenge isn't about destruction, it's about restoration, about making yourself whole again, one deliberate decision at a time. That weekend, I met Tara for coffee. She asked how it felt to lead the presentation alone. "Strange," I said, stirring sugar into my cup. "But good strange." She smiled and told me everyone had been talking about it, about how calm I looked, how sure. I shrugged, half embarrassed, half proud. "I just told the truth," I said. "Nothing more." She lifted her mug. "That's usually enough." When I got home later that night, I opened my window and let the cool air in. The city murmured below, soft and alive. I thought about the months that had led me here, the doubt, the betrayal, the long nights alone in front of a glowing screen, and realized none of it had been wasted. Every wound had carved space for clarity. Every silence had taught me how to listen to myself again. I switched off the light, sat on the edge of my bed, and whispered to the quiet room. Friday was mine. It wasn't triumph I felt then. It was balance, the kind that comes from knowing you don't have to prove anything anymore. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's the simple act of walking away from the fire you didn't have to start, watching it burn itself out, and realizing you're already standing in the light. A week later, a box waited for me at the front desk. No note, just my name written in a hurried hand. The receptionist smiled politely as she slid it across the counter, but her eyes lingered, curious. I thanked her, carried it upstairs, and set it on my desk before opening my laptop. For an hour, I ignored it, working through emails, answering questions, pretending it wasn't there. But its silence filled the room. When I finally lifted the lid, familiar things looked strange. The sweatshirt Nate used to steal from my apartment, 2 coffee mugs I hadn't missed, and a flash drive, silver, scratched. At the edges, the same one we'd used to back up our shared project, the one I'd assumed was long gone. I held it in my palm for a long time, feeling the weight of it. Memory has mass. Even small objects can feel heavy when they hold ghosts. I turned the drive over, debating. Curiosity won. I plugged it in. One file appeared on the screen. No label, no date, just a blank icon pulsing faintly. I hesitated, then pressed play. His voice spilled into the quiet. "Lacey, if you're listening to this, I didn't know it would go that far. I didn't think, I thought I was being careful. Carla said we'd handle it. I didn't mean to hurt you. It just got out of hand." A pause. The kind that stretches time, then, softer. "But you burned everything down. You didn't have to. You didn't have to make me look bad." Another pause, longer this time. A breath. "But maybe I deserved it. I guess I always knew you were smarter than me." The recording clicked to silence. For a heartbeat, I waited for more. An explanation, an apology, something. Nothing came. Only the hum of the computer fan. I sat there, letting the words settle like dust on water, then deleted the file. No replay, no keeping. I ejected the drive, dropped it into the trash, and didn't look back. Some stories don't need epilogues, because this was never about him. It never really was. A few days later, Janice scheduled a department meeting. The subject line read simply, "Team Standards and Digital Ethics." The conference room filled slowly. Paper cups, whispers, nervous glances. No names were used, but everyone knew why we were there. Janice stood at the front, steady voice, calm expression. She spoke about collaboration, data integrity, professional trust. Words like boundaries and accountability replaced gossip and rumor. When her eyes met mine across the room, I understood. This wasn't just a policy update. It was a reckoning. Afterward, as people gathered their things, Tara stopped beside me. She looked hesitant, twisting a pen between her fingers. "I used to think you were trying too hard," she said quietly. "Now I realize you were just trying not to disappear." The words hit harder than I expected. For months, I'd moved through hallways feeling invisible, every effort diluted by someone else's louder voice. Hearing her say it out loud felt like being seen for the first time. I swallowed, nodded once. "Thanks for saying that." She smiled, small but sincere, and walked away. It was enough. By the end of the month, the promotion became official. Senior strategist, full ownership of the next campaign. My name printed on a new placard outside my office door. When the internal newsletter went out that Friday, I scrolled through the lines twice before believing them. Lacey Peterson's work set the bar this quarter for integrity, strategy, and leadership under pressure. I printed the email not to frame it, but to keep, a quiet reminder of the road behind me. The company shifted after that, subtly but unmistakably. No more whispered alliances in glass rooms, no more uncredited edits. People locked their screens, labeled their files, said thank you more often. Not just to me, to everyone. It was as if transparency had become contagious. Some faces disappeared. Others stayed and learned. Even Brad started joining morning check-ins instead of delegating them away. The atmosphere grew lighter, though the work stayed hard. Integrity, I realized, didn't make the job easier. It just made it cleaner. And me? I learned the art of stillness, the difference between silence that hides and silence that heals. I stopped second-guessing my instincts, stopped apologizing for being thorough, for being sharp, for caring too much. I started walking into rooms without shrinking to fit them. Sometimes, during company events, I'd catch someone glance my way, the quick flicker of recognition. That's her, the one who stood her ground. They never said it aloud, and they didn't need to. Their quiet respect was louder than any rumor had ever been. One evening after work, I lingered by the window as the city lights came on. Nashville shimmered below, traffic moving like veins of gold through dark streets. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the silence, the moment truth became unavoidable. I didn't feel anger anymore, only distance. What once felt raw now felt historic, like a story someone else had lived. I opened my laptop and reread the upcoming campaign brief. Fresh clients, clean slate, my fingerprints on every idea. This was what power looked like. Not control over others, but control over my own narrative. The quiet certainty that I could stand alone, succeed alone, and still keep my kindness intact. Later that night, I walked home under a sky heavy with stars. The air was cool, humming with the faint sound of guitars from a bar a few blocks away. Music drifted through the alleys, soft, unpolished, real. I smiled. Nashville always knew how to turn endings into songs. At home, I brewed tea and sat by the window. My reflection overlapped the skyline, two versions of me sharing the same glass. The old one, hesitant, hungry for approval. The new one, steady, no longer waiting for permission. I raised my mug slightly as if to toast her, to the lessons that hurt, to the voices that failed me, to the strength that stayed. The box from the front desk was gone now, recycled with last week's papers. But every so often I caught myself glancing at the empty spot where it had sat. Not with regret, just awareness. Closure, it turns out, doesn't always feel like doors slamming shut. Sometimes it's just a room finally quiet after too much noise. When people ask what happened that winter, I tell them this. It was the season I stopped letting other people narrate my life. It wasn't about revenge or exposure. It was about truth. About light finding its way through cracks and refusing to leave. And if I ever doubt that, I look at the small line under my name on the company site. Senior Strategist, Integrity Leadership Strategy. 3 words that once sounded heavy, now feeling like wings. I turned off the light, letting the city glow fill the apartment. The quiet wrapped around me, warm and earned. Somewhere, maybe, Nate was still trying to understand what had happened. I hoped he learned something from it, but his story wasn't mine to finish. Mine was already complete. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need applause. I had peace, the kind that doesn't announce itself, only settles in and stays. And as I closed my eyes, I knew this chapter would stay exactly where it belonged, behind me, but never forgotten. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.